Immigration is the backbone of the American story, a familiar tale of newcomers arriving with nothing and through grit, determination, and some luck, managing to carve out a place in the United States. Yet some paint immigrants as threats, spreading fear and chaos. Nativists use this to push anti-immigration policies, claiming to protect native-born Americans. Ray Suarez is a veteran journalist who spent decades exploring this social phenomenon. Through in-depth reporting and one-on-one interviews, his work has shed light on the complexities of immigration in the United States.
Ray Suarez is a veteran journalist, broadcaster, and author. In his latest book, We Are Home, he amplifies the voices of diverse Americans across the United States. Through their unique experiences, they add new dimensions to the country's timeless narrative.
We had some rough years in the last 20 years. A lot of people are disappointed, and unfortunately, they've chosen to blame immigrants for their predicament, or a lot of anxiety about the way the country is changing has been amped up by that disappointment.
What prompted you to sit down, I gotta write this book?
It didn't start out as this book, but I started to do the wool gathering that you do when you're about to launch a book project. When I saw the American discourse on immigration sort of going off the rails, and it bothered me so much that I started to think about what to write and how to write about it. You might say that the birth pangs came during the march in Charlottesville to see thousands of white men with torches chanting, "You will not replace us," was a very sad day for my country, and I think a very sad day in our wrapping our heads around the American future that's coming later this century.
The sentiment, what do you think has caused what you just described? And we've seen a lot of that. I mean, and it seems so widespread. I mean, we've done a lot of stuff on anti-Asian hate here on this network, but I mean, it just seems so. And it seemed like, you know, the United States has always kind of had that story, but it always seemed like it was way down here. Now it's up much higher.
This has been a story since the 1880s, the 1890s, the 1910s. There's always been, as you mentioned, that undercurrent of resentment toward newcomers, what they do in the economy, how they change the culture. And instead of finally just getting with it, it's like a low-grade fever. It's like an infection that never quite settles itself and is expelled from your body. So all we do is new versions of it, instead of finally saying, we don't do that anymore, because we've gotten past that. 45 million or so people born in other places in the world live here today. You can either get with that, or you can just sit and agitate about it and lament about what the country has become. A lot of anti-immigrant sentiment is about nostalgia, is about this narrative of loss that says, well, when my great-grandparents came, when my great-great-grandparents came, they worked hard, they kept their noses clean, and they became Americans. And that's a way of disparaging the new people who we imagine don't do the same thing that your own great-grandparents did or grandparents did. They're the same people. They just come from somewhere else with a different set of documents in their pocket. That narrative of loss has been with us for 200 years, and it's like a habit that we can't break.
But the more recent narrative of loss, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because when I think about it, it's like, you think about the Great Recession, you look, I mean, I lived in Ohio, there's a lot of these places where they had mills and factories and they're all shut down. But it's not that these people came in and took those jobs aren't there. They were exported to other countries. And yet it seems like these people are kind of have this animosity, it's directed in this direction, when it has nothing to do with that.
It is like an unresolved emotion that you can't shed. Yes, the people who are bussing tables in a restaurant near your house are not the people who change the steel industry or change the auto industry or change the textile industry so that we largely don't make clothes in this country anymore and we largely have our agricultural labor done by people born in other countries. They're not the people you should be mad at, but you can see them. You can't see the chairman of General Motors. You can't see the chairman of Renault or Volkswagen, but you can see that guy working at the local grain elevator or driving a truck, and you can resent him. No one's saying that this makes a lot of sense, but it is still part of our way of dealing with the fact that this country has always been a place of refuge for people from around the world.
One of the things I really like about your book is there's people from around the world. You tell different stories of different people. What were some of the things that surprised you as you approached this book and started to tell this story?
A lot of people, even after decades in this country, are very sure and a little ambivalent at the same time about just saying, I am an American. A lot of them, you ask them straight up and they say, oh yes, absolutely. And then there's like a little asterisk, a little qualifier. Deborah's an interesting case because she copped to the fact that because she was blonde and spoke good English, albeit with a Kiwi accent, she had a different life as an illegal resident of this country from the people she worked with in the restaurant business who came from all over the world and were not white. She knew that she had a certain amount of privilege that came with the absence of suspicion. The suspicion that clung around her co-workers no matter what they did, whether they were citizens or not. Deborah is a little angry at her, when she looks at America today, this is not what she bargained for, and yet she is absolutely certain she did the right thing by coming here. And that's definitely a through line in all of these stories. Some people said, look, I didn't really have much of a choice. I was a refugee. My country was in civil war. My family was being oppressed. They were very clear about why they tried to come here. None of them said, I should have gone somewhere else, or I should have stayed home. None. People who came for economic reasons, people who came just to take a chance at a better life, people who had to leave the place where they were living, people who had family here and got in one way or another, all of them say, I'm glad I came, I'm glad I'm here. And a lot of them said a version of, nowhere else in the world is my story possible except for here.
There's an interesting piece early on, excuse me, a gentleman you profile. He's in Yemen, he's in Kenya, he comes to the United States. It's an amazing story, and maybe you can amplify on what I've just said because it's very short. But what I thought was interesting is when you asked him about, do you feel like you're an American? He's kind of ambivalent, but he makes the point that like his contemporaries who stayed in Kenya, their lives are not like his life. And you outline that in this story about him.
Samir is like the Forrest Gump of the last 40 years. Born in Kenya of a Yemeni family, is a very old Arabian Peninsula community in Mombasa on the Indian Ocean. He comes to Columbia, Maryland, a planned suburb outside Washington, D.C., realizes he's bored, he's restless, he's just finished high school. He joins the U.S. Army and is transferred to Korea, and every Korean unit is paired with an American unit. And soldiers practicing their English, talking about their relatives from Korea who already live in the United States, would pump him for information about what America's like. And he would just tell them, I don't know. I was just there for a couple of months and then I joined the Army. And his answer totally puzzled them. This idea that you could end up with an American uniform with the stars and stripes on your shoulder, living in Korea, a fully trained member of the United States Army, and really know nothing about the country, just flummoxed them. He says, at the end of his time with me, I probably could have done okay wherever in the world you dropped me, but this place is different. And interestingly, it was the Muslim ban, the Trump era move to try to limit the number of Muslims coming to the United States, that made him feel more American than joining the U.S. Army did. He went with his children to an airport to demonstrate against these limitations on who could visit the United States, and felt totally American at that moment because he said, this is what makes us different. I can protest, I can yell, I can hold up a sign, and I can show my children that that's how you push back against laws that you think are unjust. He had that American epiphany a little late, maybe 25 years after he got here, but he did have it. And now his son is joining the Maryland National Guard, and he's very proud of it.
Immigration, a long-standing political battleground in the United States, was crucial to Donald Trump's 2016 victory. In the 2024 election, it resurfaced as a major issue, with Republicans referring to it as Biden's border crisis. Later, when Biden dropped out, Vice President Harris was attacked, with Trump labeling her a, quote, failed border czar.
This is always kind of a campaign issue. Is that standing in the way of a resolution?
One of the things that's standing in the way of a resolution is this idea that we have to solve everything in this massive package. Talk and address the 13, 14 million people who have been living here illegally long term, and address the people who have just come across the border, and set out the rules for the people who are to come, and set out a template for them, and address the people who came in their parents' arms or being held onto as toddlers by their parents. We don't have to solve it all at once. Every time somebody says comprehensive immigration reform, uses that phrase, they set out a goal that they know legislatively in a tightly divided Congress, in a Congress that has in recent past used immigration as a wedge issue. They're not going to come to common cause on such a massive meal. They're just not. So pick the low-hanging fruit. Create some confidence across the aisle by solving some of the more easily soluble problems early, and then saying, okay, we can work together. After we do this small thing, we can then start to talk about the big things. If you want to start from the beginning, you're somewhere else in America, you have hopes, somewhere else in the world, and you have hopes of coming to this country, that system that faces you is so daunting, expensive, complicated, Byzantine, that it really doesn't serve anybody well. Not the prospective immigrant, but not America either. I was interviewing an Indian national who's been living and working in the United States for several years. His company, the company he was working for, went out of business. Now, technically, he was supposed to go back to India. At that moment, he had 60 days to get another job. And if he didn't, he was deportable. He managed to get another job. And I said to him, well, don't you want to become an LPR, a legal permanent resident? Don't you want a green card? Because he's on some other visa now. He said, I would love to have a green card. I would love to be a legal permanent resident. But given the quota for Indian nationals, if I get on the back of the line now, the line is 100 years long. And I said to him, I guess you're just exaggerating for emphasis. He said, no, it's literally 100 years long. Now, if a guy who's an expert at his job and has a master's degree and was educated somewhere else in the world wants to live here and become value added to our society, who loses if we send him home? Of course, he loses, that's obvious. But does America lose? Probably. If we send educated people home saying, you didn't jump through enough flaming hoops and you couldn't solve our bizarre system, you're going home, we lose too. And we have very little sense of that. Right now, we have very little sense of that. But we would be the poorer if we sent this guy home.
Ray Suarez questions the notion of a border invasion and supports exploring immigration policies that focus on human rights while acknowledging the contributions of immigrants.
I love your ending of your book where it's like there's no invasion. You just kind of point by point go through and debunk a lot of the theories that are out there. How do you kind of pierce that?
I just have to quietly, patiently, and with backup, keep repeating the facts. Not always going to work. I mean, there are people who are simply going to deny the things that I tell them in this book, or they're just going to be mad that I tell them in the first place. All we can do is continue to stand up for the idea that facts are vital. There's really no way around it. I'm afraid for the future of this business when we get to a point where someone can just say, well, that's not true because I don't believe that it's true. We're stuck in that gyre right now when it comes to climate change, and we're stuck there with immigration as well.
I'm going to close with a quick question. It was quite a few years ago, over like 12 years ago. Role reversal. You were interviewing me when we were just about ready to launch, and now you're the one answering the questions. I just find this full circle. It's so interesting. We were up on the 4th floor then. We were just about ready to launch. But do you have a preference? Would you rather be the guy answering the questions or the guy asking the questions?
Oh, no question. I'd rather be the guy asking the questions. I hope I did okay, but I'm much more comfortable if we switch seats.
Well, I've been in that seat before. I'm much happier asking the questions of you. Ray, thanks so much.
Good to see you.